Hey guys, this is Mikro. I wanted to do like an up-to-date meta attack strategy guide because I haven't put out one of these in a while and the meta has changed a lot as of recently. I'd say the meta at the top of NA right now is similar to how EU was originally playing, but there's more of an emphasis on crashing on point when healers are contested that was missing from the EU aspect before. EU before would kind of try to pry out backline a lot, which is what NA does, but didn't control space as well in their backline to the builds they slotted and didn't really nuke the point as effectively as it seems to be nuked in NA. So that's the aspect that has been kind of iterated upon, but the top of the meta, NA meta, is basically what Para brought over to NA, just executed better, I guess, with like more space control oriented builds on the sides, ball groups in their backline instead of just like kind of great sword slash disruptor groups in their backline, because ball groups could also nuke clumps, so they just are straight up better than backline groups in most aspects of the game. And overall, has felt really, really solid. A lot of really fast getting into fort takes from both dropouts, egoed, uh, everyone that's tried it, like Cosmic, I'm pretty sure ran this strat too. So basically, top of the top companies in NA on every single server have been running this strategy. JDB has been running it, but they've put more of an emphasis on the flank control than the top behind point control. But yeah, the base setup here, just kind of getting into it, and then I'll get into the roster comp. The roster is pretty similar. I could probably just do this high level real quick. It's basically the same thing as it was before. There's just more flexible spots than there were before. Like there's like 6 flex spots in an army and everything else is kind of locked in. So that's kind of the only difference there. But in terms of like the main idea, off rip, you take kind of a wide wrap instead of just kind of rushing directly into B. The reason why this is better is because the people from their side who just rushed down the middle of B will not be met with a lot of resistance, but they'll kind of end up in a spot where there's not a lot of value because healers will wrap wide, everyone's going to wrap wide, so they'll be in your backline, but they won't really do a lot. And then that's kind of like your trap. Once they're in your backline, you just kind of shoot them with the ranged players in 9 and 10, which usually are a combination of decks and bows, which have some sort of melee disruptor oriented build there that goes on the 9 and 10 healers, while the ranged players pelt those players overall. So it's kind of like a draw play, like you bait them into this middle lane, and then they just kind of get run over and you just flank onto their back line and get on them on both sides. It's not necessarily like a strong stack on either side. There's just like 4 groups that go either side, so you could think of it as like everywhere is kind of stacked strong on the wide sides because the mid is weak, right? So you have your 1 and 2 just tank the brute force of the push, which they're built to be tanky, so it just kind of works out. Usually you get into their back line, you kind of harass the healers. Once the healers are out of LOS of the point team, you turn and you actually nuke the point. You get one wipe on a point team, and that's usually enough to take B. Otherwise, some people do a split strat still, and you can still do the split strat, still works very, very well. But this has been very effective to creating that initial tick. Once that initial tick happens, you can do a split. If you were to be in a spot where you cap that, either from the split or not from the split, usually this is how people rotate. It's like the same strat on the side point, it's just everything here is a little bit off because I had to move stuff. But the main idea again is you don't try to berserk everything through their bonfire, you try to wrap from the actual kind of fort side and get into the backline. You try to wrap wide on the war camp side, get into the backline. Very big emphasis on hitting healers, very big emphasis on getting into the backline. Once healers are pressured, it's very inconsistent for people that are not on their healers to get peeled or to get healed. So it will draw people to peel for their healers, and at that point they're already losing space. There's not like a super easy way to counter the strat. The best way I've figured is if people send this 9 and 10 to the backline, which some people do, they'll push the 9 and the 10 up. At that point, you know their backline's basically free and you need to flip map, or you need to figure out a way to get on their healers very, very quickly. But I think it's just easier in general just to flip map. You have your healers just go wide, they wrap around, they kind of switch backlines. Before, this wouldn't really work super well because if people played in your backline, you could just kind of hit horns and kind of went off of that. As of recent, people have been breaking those horns, the two that could hit people, which are here and here, or top of the point on B. The other thing too is there's not like a musket on the wall now to consistently blow those horns, so the horns are kind of inconsistently in going off, so you're not getting that constant horn buff on your backline, as well as the horn in general got nerfed because it got moved to new Fortify versus old Fortify, so it's not as impactful now. It's mostly the healing that is important from the horns, so it's not as OP as it used to be, and that as a result of that, playing in the other team's backline is not very easily punished. So that's why everyone's been kind of like full zerging the backlines. That kind of counters this whole protect a corner of the point strategy that Supple has been running for a very long time. And I wouldn't say like this is directly countered Supple, but dropouts
did go from getting 2-point held to getting to fort within 5 to 10 minutes, I think, versus supple once implementing this strat and had a really good chance at winning with a decent amount of mercs for that war as well. So not the strongest roster could have put forward, but it worked very well because the strat is just very, very good. And the strategy was developed by Egode, which is who's going to EU. So I imagine EU is either gonna do well versus this or is gonna kind of fall over versus it. We'll see. Once you get into the fort aspect, there's kind of an aspect. This looks ugly, but you get to the fort, you break the gate, then you kind of ping pong around. So you go A, you go B, you go C, and then from there you kind of have this strong overload on the backside. Why it's good to have a strong overload on the backside away from where you first were? It's just because a lot of the defenders sometimes get stuck on A and they try to, I guess, do too much. Like a lot of Dex players in particular, they kind of just have like a I just go kill mindset, and they end up like sometimes on the A flag, and like they're thinking they're doing really good. It's like, oh yeah, we ran them back to A flag, guys, but really your attack is coming from the backside. Once that backside push gets set and goes in, these players end up kind of soft trolling, and from there a lot of mistakes tend to happen. The other big thing about this strategy is B is a draw now. Before you'd have your B gate push, people would stack the B gate really heavily. The problem with getting B in first is B gets to point. This tick is fake tick because it doesn't really matter because you don't have space control, and then B just gets nuked, and then B is resetting, and then they just clean up the rest of the fort. So what people have been adapting to is B is now a draw play. B intentionally plays to play slow, waits for people to crash behind. Once people crash behind, there's ice showers down. People go for a detonate push, try to blow up the people on B, and then go for tick because that's real tick at that point because they have no point team. You have a point team on point, and you can snowball from there. A lot of the other emphasis is on getting through, overloading this back gate, and then getting stage control. Once you get the stage control, it's really hard for healers on the other side to live. A lot of emphasis again on pressuring the healers. People are getting up top. This is kind of made possible because people are running a eighth kind of ball setup with a Great Axe Warhammer. These two slots sometimes are flex slots, but usually are preferred to be Great Axe Warhammer, which is why those are there. But they play Great Axe Warhammer in a disruptor like manner. So everything is kind of very disruption, like go on the healers, prow the healers, and everything is based on getting in their backline. At the end of the day, you should have some sort of setup like this where you have your two squads that are dex oriented up top. You have your respawns flooding through B, which at this point is kind of an open channel because no one really plays in B at this point because all your healers can play on this far side for free because you overloaded that and you took all the space there. So your healers are set up. You have the stage control, so their healers aren't set up. They're forced to play on the other side of the map, and then you basically have a 50-50 for point. But you have ranged players up top who could be 3-2-1ing their healers, and it just overall creates a lot of pressure. Very, very easy to reinforce from both the A side and from the B side, or I guess it would be C gate side, but A flag side, and from B just because these are usually open channels at this point. If you kind of get people in, the big emphasis again is going on healers and then living. Once you do that, the strat gets a lot easier. Let's look at the army comp now and how this is kind of different. I wouldn't say the comp has changed a lot. The ults have changed a bit, and that's the main thing I think EU as a current kind of struggles with, because PAR is still getting 2-point held. I don't think they've adapted to this as well as NA has. But point team, I think everyone's kind of on board with this at this point. Main idea behind AoE healers, AoE healer, Pryos putting stuff on the SNS Pryos playing in the clumps. The adaptation I have made as of recent as the SNS is a lot better often to go SNS IG. The reason why that's good now is because the detonate pushes are so big. The IG shower tends to be more tempo control, as in you can kind of trap people in and they get blown up by detonate, and you can play really aggressive because you have the SNS, or you can use it to prevent people from getting pushed through you cleanly, which tends to be a little bit better than the VG kind of rend. I find that the space control aspect of IG just tends to be a little bit better. But Great Axe Warhammer is still the same. This point flex slot, I think it's still preferred for it to be heavy IG VG. A lot of shot callers in NA tend to be BB players, so usually that's like kind of the shot caller spot, and they get slotted on medium IG BB typically. Heavy just doesn't do enough damage. Medium is okay. You can kind of play passive and peel for healers in the gate phase, which usually you have like one or two people who stick around on the speed choke, like a fire staff or a bow or a BB, like one of those three builds. You have usually two of those. They stick around and beat choke, make sure that the drops aren't super free. And along with that, that extra BB can help in that aspect. And the main emphasis again is just playing slow. So there's not really a point to push in early. You're kind of waiting for your army to open it up for you. Once your army opens it up for you, it's very easy to get in. So that's the main idea behind that slot. Ball groups are pretty standard. This is the part where It kind of differs depending on the NA company. Some NA companies run more IGBBs than others. Uh, in my opinion, right now, I think 2 to 3 IGBBs is necessary for backline control, preferably three, and then the other slots are dependent on how your players play. So if you like to push up a lot, BB isn't very good at pushing and holding space. It's like a very easy build to target and single out. So I don't find that slot to be as good. Supple runs a light IGBB in that spot where they kind of push and hold space. So that's a spot where that could be viable, but I find or we find that the infinite dropouts of the fire staff tends to be better, and great sword kind of light schizo oriented builds that uh, AP Southeast, and it has like kind of popularized is like very good there. These builds typically have like 150 con or 50 con depending on the player. Main idea is these builds can literally two tap healers with the space that you control, and because you're playing so heavy in their backline, it's very difficult to single out these builds and target them since they're so mobile and they have 150 dex. They can kind of run around all the time. You can run it with 150 con if you feel like that's necessary to live. Honestly, I've been was originally against it, and I'm more and more on board the 50 con dex train because it literally two taps anyone it touches, which is just super frightening. But that is really strong in that aspect because if you have space control, it's a really good build. But if you don't have space control, the 150 definitely is better. So it's kind of a flex slot there. But Fire Staff is also good there. IGBB is also good there. I'd just say for these slots, you kind of it's less of slotting the ideal build and it's more about slotting your best players. So if you have like really good Fire Staff players, you probably put the Fire Staff players there. If you have really good BBs, why not just put the BBs there? If you have other really good builds that you can't really find a slot for, these are the spots where you usually could fit them in. These other two ball slots kind of could be fit in as flex spots as well, but you don't really want to weaken that too much because the Great Axe Warhammer just is just in general just still super strong, even though it's got nerfed like 5 or 6 times at this point. It is still the best build in terms of being able to disrupt and kind of turn for the point itself and blow that up. So no contest there. In terms of kill squad, again, you have some more flex groups. There are flex spots. These are for kind of great sword SNS variants, kind of disruptor oriented roles that kind of lead the charge for the bows, lead the charge for the fire staff. A lot of time these get paired with Ice Gauntlet, but it kind of depends on the player. Sometimes you have SNS Greatsword, sometimes you have Great Axe in there, Light Great Axe, or something kind of off meta, but that's the spot for them. The other thing that some people run is this IGVG slot sometimes gets dropped for another IGBB. Some people have been running kind of a light BB Warhammer, and that spot is like something that's like decent in this B choke phase because it can kind of one shot combo the people that are out here. It can also push in and kind of do some weird things there. So that's like another kind of niche build. But the main idea here is there's a lot more slots that are more flexible than people realize that you can put other builds in, but there are some slots that are kind of hard locked in. Like the vast majority of an army is very static. You really can't change it until Great Axe Warhammer gets overhauled as an entirety, which it likely will not be. So you're just kind of stuck with the setup where you have a ton of Great Axe Warhammers. This eighth ball group didn't really exist before. It's been turned more into a ball group. The reason why that's super nice is in this fort phase. It's just like nice to have that other ball group to get in. It feels like three kind of lighter groups that can't really get in easily unless they have space created just aren't able to do that as a whole. And having 8 ball groups just makes it really easy because you put 2 people on B usually, you put 2 people on the side gates. I think you put 1 ball group on the back gate from a defense perspective, or offense, you could be very balanced, or you could be super aggro on one side, and it's just a lot more flexible and a lot easier to set up than having 7 ball groups and then groups that kind of need other groups to help them get in, but once they're in, they actually get a lot of value. So that's the whole idea behind that. The other thing that I think EU as an entirety and other regions I've seen messes up a lot is in terms of ultimates. So I wanted to go over ultimates and kind of like what is best in class and like what is pretty good. For heavy SNS, which is kind of a one of, some regions run 5 of these, I have been told. So I guess it depends on the region a lot. Firestorm is very good because it basically hard counters everything that is meta, specifically the cleansing Firestorm. And then Bile is pretty good. Medium Great Axe Warhammer, you go detonate. There's no debate on that. You still go detonate, even with the changes. Heavy IGVG, Vines is best, and with IGVG in general, Vines is still best. If you could catch people with the vines into a shower or a shower into vines, I could very easily set up clump nukes. Bile is pretty good. And a medium IGVG, I would argue that Detonate is very underrated and very possible to be run because you can get the Empower cap in this build very easily. 150 int buffs the Detonate damage, so it actually, in theory, does more damage than the Bruiser would do with Detonate. It's just not super popular, but it is something that you can carry with if you are good with it. It's just I think Vines is just generally a little bit better. IGBBs, they should be on Bile. Firestorm is okay, but Bile is heavily preferred. The thing that Bile brings to the table that no other ult does is kind of mass AoE disease. IGBB, you don't slot enough for them for the AoE disease to really be potent, and because there's pressure on the healers, a lot of the damage that you have sticks, and Bile with that disease factor and that damage over time just tends to make it so that people just naturally die a lot easier, and Bile is enough to put people over the top. A lot of the time, this has been moved to an IGBB, a Firestaff slot, because you can just kind of chuck it and it just gets value. So that's been the big setup there. From a EU perspective, this kind of detonate meta has been a thing for a while where Firestaffs use detonate, they burn out into clumps, and then they either get tons of value or they die. Why take a 50-50 when you can just kind of get value off the bio alone? I've also seen way too many clips, especially from when you came to NA, of Firestaffs using detonate together, like four of them on a healer, and they wouldn't even do any damage to the healer because the healer would just dodge and then repost one of them and dodge again. So it's just generally a lot more risky to use detonate with fire stuff. There are some people that make it work, but I would argue the people that have made it work don't do the stereotypical detonate with the burnout, and they kind of try to disguise it a little bit more and wait for people to be low stamps. They either have to gray bar or dodge the detonate. And if they gray bar, they end up dying. If they dodge the detonate, they end up dying. And there's only a few people in NA that I think are good at that style, and Bug Abuse is the one that kind of comes to name. But there's not many people that really can get the detonate to work consistently. With bow rapier, cannon tends to be best because this tends to be a class that kind of needs animation cancels. So heavy pen shot, very good animation cancel. Heavy cannon, very good animation cancel. It just allows you to do a lot more burst. And burst is the name of the game. You need to 3-2-1 people. You need to blow people up instantly before they could react. And that is where bow rapier shines the most. And cannon tends to enable that the most. But there are other ults that are okay. Bile again is decent just because you can just chuck it and get value. I've seen some people run detonate even with this and get decent value, but they tend to be more rapier oriented players than I would say bow oriented players, but they slot bow rapier, if that makes sense. And you guys probably know who I'm talking about if you follow dropouts at all, but there's a couple players that like to run detonate there, and I don't think it's awful. And then healers, they're still on mending stone form because you just need it to live. I would argue that the life-stealing bile actually could be nichely viable other than the cunning bile, but I don't think people have found a way to really make it work consistently yet. It seems decent from a IGVG on point perspective just to have one of them because you throw one of those down. Every detonate that you cast in an area is going to be a full heal off of that, just off the lifesteal alone. So it seems like it's pretty consistently good, but you have to have a player that knows how to use it, and it's kind of a more niche alt, kind of like Firestorm, where if you have a player that knows how to use it, it's S tier. But if you don't have a player that, if you have a player that just uses off cooldown, doesn't really know what they're doing with it, it is easily like one of the worst value ultimates in the game. So it really depends on the player, guys. But this is like the whole idea: play their road, get a lot of value in their road, wrap wide, make sure you get into the backline for free. Once you're in their backline, just target the healers. When the healers are out of range at the point, you turn nuke point, a lot of emphasis on coming to point when you have nothing to do, so you control your zone. Once they're past that kind of line where they can consistently heal point, that's when you make sure that the point is wiped up and all nice and clean. And you try to force them to play in your backline. If they play in your backline or LS in their healers, those people tend to get picked apart by the decks and fire staff and blunderbusses that are present on the battlefield as a whole. And let me know if you guys have any questions about this, but this has been, I'd say, meta and NA for 3 to 4 weeks at this point, so I don't think it's like new news, but I think it's stuff that people haven't really picked up on a lot still, and I just want to make a video about it. I'll see you guys in the next one.